going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Thanks so much for tuning in. You're watching Unbiased Magic Reviews, the place you come to learn the truth about magic and mentalism. Today I've got a requested magic review for you guys, and I've gotten a lot of requests lately, so please bear with me. If you have requested that I review something, you may want to send me a message just to remind me, because I have so many people that have requested stuff. I'm trying to slowly work my way through it. Today we're taking a look at Methods in Mentalism, Volume 1 by Nikolas Mavresis. And this was put out by Alakazam Magic. You can pick it up for $36. You will get over 3 hours of video instruction where you're going to watch Nikolas Mavresis perform 9 routines, and then he goes over them in detail with a couple of his friends. Now I'm going to start this out by just giving you guys a couple of generalities about this lecture, and then I'm going to go over each of the routines. But before I do that, I do have to tell you guys that I have no disclosures. No one sent this to me for free, and this review reflects my own opinions and my own experiences and thoughts about this material. Now, when you read the ad copy of this, a lot of these routines seem really enticing. They seem like some really awesome stuff. And if you know Nikolas Mavresis, then you're probably familiar with him because he's a well-known creator of mentalism. He's put out a couple of products that have gotten a lot of attention, like his Sentimental deck or his Zener match and some other stuff like that. I know he's done some projects with David Jonathan. So this project is mostly mentalism with playing cards. Okay, that's what this is. There's one routine that uses a Sven pad, but all the rest of them use playing cards one way or the other. It is very prop heavy, so you're going to be using that because 1/3 of all of these routines use a custom specialty deck, like the Destination deck or the Sentimental deck. So you're going to have to buy those. Those are separate. About half of these projects use some kind of arts and crafts props, so you're going to have to buy other items to put this together. And 6 out of the 9 items involve heavy memory work, meaning that you're going to have to practice and have a decent memory to be able to perform them. So if you're not a fan of memorized stuff, then you might not like this material. There are 2 routines that use just a regular deck of cards, but one of those routines does use a memorized deck. So it's important that I put that out there. Those are really the basics about this. Let's get into the individual routines so you can get a better idea. The first routine is called the No Peak Name and Place, and this is listed as Nikolas Mavresis' version of Bob Cassidy's Name and Place routine that does not involve a peak. So I thought this was the absolute worst routine on this lecture. I thought that the method was hideous, unfortunately. And the only thing it had in common with Bob Cassidy's routine was that it uses a name and a place. Other than that, it doesn't have anything in common with the original version by Bob Cassidy. So in this version, you tell a spectator that you're going to have them think of a name. You give them a card. They're going to write it down in the card, put it in an envelope, and then you give them a deck. And this is a specialty custom deck. It's actually the Destination deck, and you show them that there's all these different destinations on each card, and you tell them you want them to cut the deck once for each letter of the person's name that you're thinking of, and then take the card and look at it and put it in your pocket or whatever, and you take the deck back. Now, under those conditions, you're able to tell them the name of the person that they wrote down as well as the destination that they're thinking of. Now, the actual methods that are involved are horrible. I mean, one of the methods is instant stooging, which is just like terrible when there's so many other better methods out there. And then the second method is a highly gaffed specialty deck. So it's almost like you're trying to kill a fly with a bazooka. It doesn't make any sense to me why Nikolas Mavresis went down this path, especially because in the version of Bob Cassidy's Name and Place routine, the real idea of the routine is that the person gets a completely free thought choice of a name and a place. Or if you're using multiple spectators, one person's thinking of a name, the other one's thinking of a place. There's no way you could know that. That's what makes the effect so strong. not like in this version. And what also makes Bob Cassidy's effect so strong is it's a double-blind test, meaning that not only do you not know what they're thinking of, but after they write their information down on their piece of paper and they mix them up, you don't know which is which, neither do they. That's why the effect is so powerful. So this is the worst effect on this whole lecture. I would recommend that you totally stay away from it. I think that if you watched it, you would just laugh when you saw how this is being done. You would say, like, that's ridiculous. You're never going to use that. If you do like Bob Cassidy's name and place routine, you can learn it from Bob Cassidy. I know he put out an instructional video on Penguin Magic, as well as many different variations and versions of it. Most well-known mentalists have put out some kind of version of it. I know Scott Creasy, he put out a version that used an impression pad. I even went over a version that Julian Losa had put out. I have my own version that I perform that just uses business cards and nothing else. In fact, I'm going to share with you guys my performance, a performance of mine, of my version of the name and place routine, where I performed it totally surrounded for a bunch of nurses. I'm going to actually leave a link in the description because I told you guys I was no longer going to be sharing audio performances in my reviews, and so I will leave a link in the description to like an unlisted video, which is going to be a performance video of mine, so you can hear and see what a version of the name and place routine sounds like in real time. You can see why it is such a strong effect. Moving along to the next effect, we have the impossible triple prediction. This effect, Nikolas Mavresis said, was the hardest routine that he knows how to do. It does use a regular deck of cards, but it does use a memorized deck. And in this routine, 3 spectators are going to each think of a card, and you're going to divine them under test conditions. That's what this is listed as. And the way that the effect looks is that you take a deck of cards, you give it a couple of cuts, and you tell the first person that you want them to cut off a section of cards, and then you have the second person cut off a section of cards. You tell the first person you want them to take a look at the top card, memorize it, and then give his pack a cut. The second person, you tell them you want them to think of the bottom card and then shuffle up their cards. They get to shuffle their cards. And then the third person looks at the bottom card and they get to shuffle their cards as well. So under those conditions, you're able to tell each person what card they're thinking of. Now, this is not new at all. This is a very standard type of effect that is done with the memorized deck. And I would argue that Nikolas Mavresis' version, first of all, it's unoriginal. And on top of that, it's incongruent. And the main reasons why is because the versions that are decent, each person gets to cut the cards, not just 2 out of the 3 people. Even watching Nikolas Mavresis perform it, he almost screwed it up because he forgot when he got to the second person to tell them to look at the bottom card instead of the top card. He started to tell them to look at the top card, because the problem is that after the deck is cut into 3 piles, the first person you tell them to look at the top card, then the second and third person you tell them to look at the bottom card. So it doesn't make sense. It would make more sense if each person got to cut the cards and they look at the card they cut to. That would make a lot more sense. The other thing about this routine I really didn't like was that there's a kicker ending he adds where the third person, after they've shuffled the cards, they put them in their pocket, and you're able to predict how many cards they have in their pocket. So that just changes the whole effect. So you no longer are divining cards. Now you've predicted ahead of time how many cards the second person was going to cut off. And the problem with that is then it feels like a force. It doesn't feel like it was a free choice. So I think that the kicker prediction ending is just very weak and it's not necessary. And I would point you guys to other versions of this trick that are much, much better. One example would be Darwin Ortiz's Card Sense. The effect is a lot better because each person cuts and they look at the card that they cut to at the bottom of their pack that they're holding on to. So I think that Darwin Ortiz's version is very workable and it's very easy to perform and it's not difficult. Now, if you're looking for a version that feels more like mentalism and is completely impossible, I would recommend you check out the John Cornelius card system. I mean, this is an old one, but the reason why it's so strong is because Each of the three people cuts the cards. Each of them looks at the card they cut to. Each of them shuffle their cards. Now, what you do is you start with the third person and you tell them you're going to get a sense of the card that they're thinking of. You write something down on a little piece of paper, you put it on the table, and you say, okay, you take their pack and you go through it and you simply take out the card that you think is the one they're thinking of, the one you wrote down. And then you do the same thing for the second and the third person. So when each person tells you their card, they could see that not only did you write it down, but the card you took out of each packet also matches. So the reason why it's so strong is because each person, you are writing down the card that they're thinking of before you even touch their packet of cards. And the only reason to touch the packet of cards is just to confirm what you already know. Is just to take out the card that you already got a sense is the card they're thinking of. Very, very strong. Now, if you are looking for a version that is a lot more difficult to perform, but also very, very impressive, I would recommend you check out Simon Arison's four-way intersection. And I have mentioned it on another review I did in the past. The reason why I think that Simon Arison's four-way intersection is like the top of the ladder of this type of effect is because you use four spectators. Each one cuts the packet, looks at where they cut to. They each shuffle the cards that they're holding onto. Then you put the pack back together, and all you do is start dealing the cards face up. And you tell each of the spectators that when they see their card, just think stop. And then as you get to each spectator's card, you're like, oh, I got a sense right there. This card, it's your card, isn't it? And then you keep dealing. And the reason why it's so strong is because you apparently do nothing. All you do is take the deck after it's reassembled and you just start dealing cards face up, and you're just going to try to get a sense of each person's card, or when they say stop, it feels like real mind reading, which is why I recommend it to you. It is the most difficult version to learn. You will have to practice because it's not self-working by any stretch of the imagination. So there is some mental gymnastics involved, but again, it is so impressive. And for that reason, I would say that it is an effect that you may want to dedicate some time to if you want some real powerhouse in your bag of tricks. So let's move along to the next effect. All right, the next effect is called Ultimate Cluedo, and this is a commercial effect that you can buy for $33. It uses 14 custom cards that have images of men and women on them, and basically you're going to designate one of them as a killer. But they're gonna do it without looking at their faces. The cards are cut a couple of times, and the spectator chooses one at random. A sticker is put on the back of it, and then you add another 6 cards to it, and then the cards are shuffled up under the table. They're brought out face up. You don't know which one has the sticker on the back, and then the mentalist guides the spectator through a process where they eliminate all cards except for one, and that's going to be the killer. Again, it's a commercial effect. It's very straightforward and simple. It is a clever principle, but again, it does use this type of specialty deck. So if you're into it, you might like it. The next effect is called Anger Management. This is another effect that does use memory work, and it does use a DIY deck. So you're going to need to get some blank cards and make it up yourself. And so the basic gist of this is it is a 2-phase routine where you're going to have the spectator take a look at these cards that they have some emotions on them, and they're going to choose one, and you're able to divine the one that they chose. And then it's a 2-phase routine. The second phase looks really hands-off because what ends up happening is that they cut the pack a bunch of times, and then they deal out 3 cards, and they think of one of those 3, but you don't know which one you don't even know which one they're thinking of. You don't even know which are the cards that they chose, and you're able to tell them almost immediately what emotion that they're thinking of. The method is multi-layered. It's actually really clever, and I could see that a lot of people would probably like this effect. And there is memory work, and there is DIY, and all of that stuff. So it may be more work than it's worth to you, unless it's something that you really like a lot. So there are positives and negatives to it. I thought that the effect played really well. I thought that it was a good effect, and when I originally just watched the performance of it, half of it I figured out immediately, but the other half escaped me, and that was because there was a really clever switch involved. So that was really good. All right, the next effect is called Russian Bank Night, and this is another heavily DIY routine that's a multiple out effect that also does utilize some heavy memory work as well. So you're going to have a bunch of envelopes, and so you're going to ask the spectator for their credit card. They're going to mix up the envelopes. They're going to put their credit card in one of those envelopes. The envelopes are all mixed up. And then you're going to have the spectator make a choice. They're going to basically they're going to choose an envelope, and you're going to destroy all the other envelopes is basically what it does. And it really depends on what choices they make, in what direction that you go in with this. So the method is clever because there's a lot of different things at play there. And I thought that the best part of this effect was more or less just the general observations that he goes over regarding the patio force. But other than that, I thought that this was an effect that unfortunately requires a lot of DIY. And because you cut up all of the other envelopes, I can't see this as something that anybody would really want to perform regularly, because you're going to destroy your props with every performance. It does build up the suspense, obviously, that you cut up all the envelopes but one, and that's the one that has their credit card in it. That's the idea. It's not really a bank night effect at all, because it doesn't follow any of the rules of bank night. It is much more like a Russian roulette type effect, really, more than anything else. That's really what it feels like. But again, it's another effect that's going to require a lot of DIY. You're going to have a color printer. You're going to have to cut and glue stuff. You're going to need envelopes. And then you're going to just destroy all that stuff. So I can't see this as a routine that a lot of people would probably like. All right, moving along to Spell-lebrity. And this was my favorite effect on the lecture. This is pretty much the only effect on the lecture I would probably utilize myself. It just uses a regular deck of cards. And what you do is you use two spectators, you divide the deck in half, you let each spectator shuffle up their half completely, and one spectator, you're going to let them make a choice from a spread, and then the second spectator, you're just going to fan out the cards and have them just think of one. And then you're going to tell that second spectator that's merely thinking of a card, you're going to tell them that you want them to deal one card for every letter of the card that they're thinking of. And you tell the first spectator to follow suit. And when he gets to the end of dealing, you find that the first spectator's card is at that spot as well. And then the effect has a second phase where you can instantly repeat it and have both spectators again select a different card, and then they can both spell down to their cards and find their selections in real time. So I think it's a very straightforward effect, and it's something you can do with your regular deck of cards. It's actually super easy to perform. I would say it's like semi-self-working, and I think that probably you're gonna like it a lot. The next effect is called Happy Hour, and this is going to require not only some memory work, but also a DIY deck. So you're going to have to print out some stickers and put them on blank cards. Basically, you're going to have a deck that has a bunch of different drinks on them. And so you're going to divide it up in between 3 people, the deck. You're going to let them shuffle up their sections. They're going to each choose a drink that maybe they like. And then those 3 cards are going to be mixed up and put face down in front of you. And by psychometry, you're going to be able to tell which card belongs to who, basically. Now, the underlying principles are as old as the hills for the most part. And if you don't have good eyesight, then you're going to have a really hard time with it, because you'll never be able to read the markings well. So to have to carry around an entire, DIY deck just to do a simple psychometry effect, I would never do that. There's so many versions of pseudo-psychometry without having to carry around a specialty deck. So the next routine is called Dinner With Me, and it kind of has the same kind of theme of food. And this is the routine that uses a Sven pad. I thought that the little subtleties that Nikolas Mavresis has added to this, they're not bad. And here you're going to show your spectators that you have a pad that has like different foods in there, like appetizer, main course, and dessert. and you can show that each page has different ones on it. And you're going to have your spectators basically open up the pad. One person's going to think of an appetizer, somebody else is going to think of a main course, and somebody else is going to think of a dessert, and then you're able to divine each person's. I thought the subtleties were really good, and it's something that you could use with a Sven pad and go in any direction you want. So I think that this is another routine on here that some people may like a lot. The Sven pad is a DIY one, and I don't see anything wrong with that at all. I think that this is probably the other routine on this lecture that is probably the one that will be used the most, just because it's something that would be easy to make and that pad is going to last. It's not something that you're going to destroy, so you can have to just make it up once and then you can just carry it with you and use it again and again. So you may like it, especially if it fits your persona. The last routine on the lecture is called Triple Movie Prediction, and this does use the Sentimental deck. So if you don't own that, you're going to have to buy that, and that's $35. It's probably the best effect on the whole lecture because it's totally hands-off. In terms of the deck is going to do all the heavy lifting for you. Again, it's another mentalism routine that uses 3 spectators. You hand the deck to one spectator and you let them just deal cards off the top until they want to stop, and then they hand the rest of the deck to the next person. They do the same thing. They deal cards off the top until they want to stop, and then they hand the deck to the last person. And then you're able to choose whether or not they want to use the top cards or the bottom cards, and you're able to right there in real time be able to read their minds in terms of the cards that they're each thinking of. It's very straightforward. The actual method is really clever, and it's all based around the Sentimental deck. So I think that if you really like the Sentimental deck, then obviously you're really going to like it a lot. I think that it plays strong because you never really touch the deck once you give it to the first spectator, and it seems like your spectators are in complete control of what's going on. Obviously, the real negative is that you're using a deck that looks really weird. It's not a normal prop by any stretch of the imagination, but some people don't care about that anyway. Those are the routines that you can expect on this lecture. Let's go over my rating and then a couple of final thoughts. The rating for this project, and you guys can see for original or novel ideas, I rated this as 3.5 out of 5. I thought that Nikolas Mavresis brought to the table a couple of interesting nuances, but taken as a whole, the principles and methods here are not really new. So the reality is that when you watch this, you're going to see that all of the actual methods, which this is supposed to be methods in mentalism, they're nothing groundbreaking, really. They're stuff that you already know about. Moving along to the teaching, you can see that I rated that as 4 out of 5. I thought his teaching was okay, although he could have elaborated more on certain aspects, and the audio quality was not good. The sound dropped many times while you were watching it, so that wasn't the best. For creativity, I gave him also a 4 out of 5. I thought that he was creative in the different routines that he came up with. Moving along to practicality, I rated that as 1 out of 5 because none of this stuff is practical, and you're going to have to do a lot of DIY, a lot of practice, the memory work involved, and just carrying around a custom deck just to do one simple effect. It's just not practical in the real world. Moving along to magic theory and presentational tips, I rated that as 3 out of 5. I thought that he gave some really good little tips here and there, especially the tips he gives with the Sven pad, being able to, list more than one item, and yet, it looks like they still have a choice, but you're still kind of forcing them. And I thought that the little tips he gave with the patio force was also really good. And then finally, the price I rated as 2 out of 5. Because I thought for the money that you're paying, you're really not getting that much. Even though you're watching a 3-hour lecture, you're not going to be able to walk away from this and be able to use a lot of this material, because you're going to either have to buy specialty decks, or else you're going to have to buy more materials to build your own custom deck, or your own props to do a lot of the routines that you're going to learn on here. Not to mention all the work that's going to go into trying to memorize the things you need to so you can perform the routines without messing them up. So there is a lot of investment involved just to learn any one of these routines that you're probably not going to really use very much. So my final rating for this project is 2.92 out of 5. It's actually unfavorable, and I would recommend that you guys just skip it. That's the reality of it. I think that there are so many better lectures out there on mentalism with material that you're going to use in the real world. Material like where you're going to just use regular normal props and not some custom specialty deck that looks weird. And personally, I mean, I have used specialty mentalism decks in the past, and I've, experimented with them, but overall, I try to stay away from them because it's hard to justify it. And I distinctly remember the last time that I used a specialty deck with somebody, and literally their comment was, "Where did you buy that?" I mean, come on, right? So that's the issue with using specialty decks in mentalism. Some people are fans of it because, it does a lot of the heavy lifting for you, but the problem is because it is such a strange thing, it's hard to imagine that your spectator is going to really believe there was any real mind reading or any real magic, because the prop you're using is just so strange. It's not going to pass as something normal. So even though the person may not realize how you did what you did, they're just going to chalk it up to the trick deck, so to speak. Anyway, I hope this has been helpful to you guys. As usual, if you have any questions or comments, just leave them for me below. Thanks so much, guys, for tuning in to my magic reviews. And if you have a request from me, either send me an email or leave me a comment below, and I will try to get to it. Again, like I mentioned in the beginning, I have a bunch of requests that I'm working on. Just bear with me. I will try to get to it. Anyway, thanks again, and I'll see you guys on the next review.